welcome to ASTROPILLED. You can thank Maybe's boyfriend for that awesome intro. I am Saddle Sued or Salad or Way. We'll go around and do some intros, and then I will share my screen and we'll just jump right into things. I am a software architect by trade. I've been working in tech for about 10 years, but over the last 5 years, I've picked up an interest in natal chart reading and also financial astrology and a little bit of global political astrology as well. And that's sort of been my obsession. And I thought it'd be fun to practice this in public and let people have insight into what it actually looks like in a reading context. I'll turn it over to you, maybe.
Yeah, I just graduated law school, but all things magic-y have become a real hobby for me that it balances out that sort of serious professional side. I am really interested in the interconnections between tarot and astrology and other forms of magical practice. And most of my experience and study so far has been in psychological astrology, but I'm really interested in the potential for electional astrology and other forms too. And today we have Yatharth visiting us, so I imagine that Salad will be sharing Yatharth's chart for everybody to take a peek at. Before we get into it, Yatharth, I just wonder if there's any burning questions you have right off the bat that would please you to have be the first thing addressed in this. Otherwise, I can take it from here.
Yes. What is like your favorite kind of reaction when you're reading people as someone who's going to be on the other side of this today?
Oh, it's really exciting, especially because of the way that we've chosen to sort of project our little podcast. That it's so fun that we've been choosing guests who are open-minded but not super well versed in astrology.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of skepticism, and watching these beautiful moments where skepticism and resonance end up kind of having a tug of war is such a juicy thing for me, and it's really fun to experience. I think that the only feeling that might compete with that as my favorite is the feeling of just noticing that something that's really been a burning question that's been on somebody's mind comes up from a reading of their chart. There's something beautiful to me about the idea that this very objective picture of somebody's mind and soul and life can bring up something that's so present and relevant to the exact moment that we have a guest on. So I think those are two feelings that I'm really grateful whenever I notice them come up.
Yeah, very much the same for me. I really like the moments where it kind of clicks, especially when we delineate or point out a sort of energetic pattern or personality configuration, I guess, that is very specific, and the other person is like, wow, like, holy cow, yeah, that's true. But also at the same time, I honestly also relish when people are like, oh, not so much, and then we can find things that do correlate and also update our own knowledge of how astrology works and how the different components fit together. Yeah, that's probably my favorite.
Yeah, I relate to that so much too. This is such a great learning experience for both of us, and I love doing it with a partner who's as excited about astrology and as relatively new to it as I am. I think this is really fun to be presenting ourselves as works in progress and helping people out.
Yeah, absolutely. And with work in progress, let's go ahead and take a look at Yatart's chart. So, can everybody see the? Well, I guess if you can't see this stream, go ahead and make some noise in any of the text channels. Otherwise, if you're viewing this as a grid, you'll see that there is a broadcast view that has a natal chart in it, and you can just click on that to maximize it.
Awesome. While you guys are bringing that up, I'll start with the sort of most prominent highlights of a person's natal chart. The sun sign is the sign that you would have seen if you saw your horoscope in a magazine or a newspaper growing up. And Yatharth's sun is in fourth house Leo. And so he's got an identity that often revolves around passion and self-expression, lots of intuition and affection, just a lot of warmth in that character. And from knowing Yatharth, I see that in him all the time. And being in the fourth house, there's an interesting feeling that I would imagine, Yatharth, that you really cherish being close to home in all of the ways that home can be meaningful to us, whether it's like a geographical location where we were born, or like making our apartment exactly the way we most like to be in it, or even just like spending a lot of time investing and enjoying our most close relationships, the family that we have in our life, whether it's the family by blood or the family by choice. The other two placements that are considered part of the big three in astrology aren't factored in explicitly to those horoscopes that you would see in a newspaper or a magazine. And that's something I think often creates misconceptions for people around astrology. Some people find that the description of their sun sign, whether it's on its own or expressed through a horoscope, doesn't capture the entirety of their personality, and it doesn't resonate fully. And that makes perfect sense, because actually everyone's natal chart includes every sign in the zodiac. And so the two other placements that are considered to be some of the most prominent are the moon and the rising sign, or the ascendant sign. And so
Yeah, and so I'll point out a little bit as
it.
well. I got a request to laser sight a little bit. So keep talking. Maybe I'll just use the mouse to highlight the things you're talking about.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for doing that, Solid.
Also, real quick, one of you, if you could mute Discord sounds, because we are getting some noise coming in from when people join and leave. I think either Yatharth or you maybe have an echo. Not sure which.
See. Well, I'll keep talking while I look and see if that might have anything to do with me.
Okay.
But Yatharth, one thing that's interesting about your chart is that you have your sun in the fourth house, Leo. It's the fixed fire sign. But your moon is in a really complementary position. It's in the 11th house in Pisces, which is the mutable water sign. So although sometimes you might think of yourself in terms of your passions and the things that you focus on, you're actually a really flexible, emotional kind of person, very dreamy, maybe even a little bit idealistic from time to time. And that draws you not just towards the things that you're focused on in your own life and surrounding your own identity, but being in the 11th house, you have a real instinct to be part of community and reach out to other people. And I imagine that you notice that as deep as you can get in your own pursuit of your own interests, you never lose touch with the importance of having friends and having relationships that provide you with like emotional support and the opportunity to offer emotional support to others. So I see that like really complementary duality to your personality in those placements. And then the third part of the big three is the rising sign, where the moon kind of represents our instincts, our defaults, and the sun represents the way we think ourselves and the direction in which we tend to grow. The rising sign reflects the way that we give off a first impression, the way that we like to appear when we present ourselves in social contexts, that kind of thing. And your ascendant, from what I know of you, just fits you to a T. You're a Taurus rising, and that is a Venusian earth sign. It's all about like sensuality and aesthetics and groundedness. And you have always seemed to me like such a peaceful person. So often when I get on a Zoom chat with you, you're like lying in the grass in a field, and it's the most Taurus thing. So to find out that that was your rising sign was just gave me this little burst of delight because you are just someone who seems so at home in nature, and you have such a distinctive flair for fashion and aesthetics, and that all shines through. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's often what people notice first about you. So having pointed out those like most prominent parts of your chart, I'm wondering how things are resonating with you so far, Yatharth.
I'm surprised by the last one, the Taurus, and being associated with that kind of calmness. It's something I got told just yesterday, multiple times from everyone I spend time with, in a sensual way, that I brought that kind of tranquility. And for me, as someone uninformed, I associate Taurus with like the raging bull and temper, and it's fascinating to hear that dance between sort of tranquility and sensuality so exquisitely described.
It's really interesting that you bring up this connection with the raging bull because I do think that there is a Taurian side of that. People with Taurus placements tend to feel very connected and protective of their close relationships. And so I imagine that people who threaten those connections will often be like the matador waving that red fabric in the air and triggering that raging bull within you. So there is this like duality to the Taurus placement of like you can picture the happy cow grazing in a pasture, loving life and being totally content without needing anything to change, and yet also having this tremendous power of love behind that, that can step out and assert itself if a situation calls for that.
Yeah, one of the flip sides, or one of the interesting dynamics of Taurus is that in its normal, calm manifestation, I find it to be very relaxed, very grounded, very stable, very patient. But especially with the big three, like Ascendant, Sun, and Moon, when a Taurus person does get pissed off, that's when the Raging Bull tends to come out. It's like it takes a lot, but then they are going to take serious and significant action, like move mountains sort of energy.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that there's also a fun duality in a Taurus rising around openness and mysteriousness, and that's something that from knowing Yatharth really resonates with me. I find that with the sister sign in Scorpio, Scorpios are often the ones that are like obviously mysterious and very hard to get. And like inside,
Yeah,
deep
opposing over
down,
here.
they're just big cuddly. Yeah, they're just big cuddly teddy bears on the inside. And then the Taurus is the opposing sister sign, and they are so friendly. They can talk to anybody. Everybody loves to be around them. But the more you get to know them, the more depth is like under that surface, and so the mysteriousness is wrapped in the teddy bear, other rather than the other way around with the Scorpio.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to describe it. Because one of the things that we know about the zodiac, or at least practice with the zodiac, is that there's this idea of an opposition between signs. There's this idea, opposites attract, and that's reflected not just one time, but 6 times across the entire zodiac with 12 signs. So Taurus and Scorpio contain something of one another within each other. And a lot of the time, just speaking more generally, when it comes to romance or friendship, you'll often be attracted to other people almost magnetically who have opposing signs to the
Mm.
planets that you have. But at the same time, it's almost like a repulsive effect because you realize that the other person has some component that's very similar to you, but it's also the exact opposite of the thing that you lack. And there's frequently this dynamic that's like, ooh, like I wanna get some of that, but at the same time, like, what the heck is this? So it's interesting, and we'll get to more of this as we go, but you've got this twice and pretty strong configuration across your chart. So while you have your ascendant in Taurus, you also have your Mars in Scorpio, which is pretty close there to that ascendant degree as well. But we'll get around to all of that.
That is,
Yeah. I
there is
wonder
so
if.
much truth to
Oh, sorry.
that.
Go ahead, Yatharth.
There's so much truth to that. I have, as anyone who has been following my Twitter would know, I had the most severest of crushes of my entire life this winter. And it
Ooh.
was with someone who was the height of mystery. My God, I had never seen a girl like her. And here I was, someone who was almost overeager to be friendly with that depth, but I encountered someone with that reverse disposition and was smitten for months, and I wanted it. And it has t today actually was a moment of completion with her, where I acknowledged that whatever it was that attracted me about her, I had developed and cultivated in myself. I had wanted it and brought it in me. But it was one of the strongest tensions in my life I have felt. And it's fascinating to see that reflected geometrically in the opposition of these signs on the chart.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it is really interesting, especially your Mars is in Scorpio, and so often we associate Mars as like what is like sexually magnetic to you, and so that you would be drawn to somebody who's like on the surface super mysterious and obviously has a lot of depth really resonates for me with that Mars placement. It's also really interesting. Having spoken a little bit about your Mars and Scorpio, the other sign that I often relate a little bit to romantic connections, and that also has a little bit to do with your ascendant in Taurus, is your Venus sign, and that's in fifth house. Virgo. And the fifth house is like very centered around romance. So as much as Venus is a romantic placement in and of itself, that it's in the fifth house would make you perhaps a hopeless romantic, if not just an especially romantic kind of person. And there's a really lovely aspect between your Venus in Virgo and your Jupiter, which is
Yeah.
also near your ascendant in Taurus. And so to have this like really easy flowing Venusian relationship between what you are romantically attracted to and the kind of love that you like to give and receive and the sort of aesthetic that really pleases you, what you find beautiful,
Mm,
has a super easygoing, earthy, lovely relationship with what in your life feels lucky and expansive. Another thing with your Jupiter and your ascendant being so close together is I think that it's likely that people see you as this growthful, like lucky, um, like glowy person. Glowy feels like an ambiguous way to put it, but it's definitely the way that I read you. And I imagine that this energy flowing between your Venus and your Jupiter, which is so close to your ascendant, all contributes to this beautiful, earthy, peaceful, loving character that people associate you with.
And one thing to point out here that's really interesting with your Venus, Yatharth, is that you've got your Venus stationary, and that is rare. This basically means that, so due to the parallax effect from observation on Earth, planets appear to move, the inner planets appear to move forward and backwards. Well, they all do, but the inner planets really move a lot due to their proximity to the Earth. So the station point is the point at which the appearance of Venus, so for Venus, it has been going either direct or retrograde and is at the exact moment when it begins to reverse direction. And that's considered to be a very powerful point because the planet is at its slowest point. Sometimes, like, station is essentially considered at a standstill, and is also said to be particularly powerful during that point, during that time, because it's like, you know, if you're imagining people moving through a room looking around, a stationary Venus is sort of like this goddess energy, or this, luxury and pleasure energy that is standing still and just gazing and looking. So there's like a lot of emphasis to this Venus in the chart, and the fact that it's stationed probably indicates that these themes of pleasure, of joy, of aesthetic enjoyment, of sensuality are all very strongly a pull for you. But also, in addition to the fact that it's tied into your Jupiter, so that's part of the story of how you feel expansive, but also the fact that it's very, very closely opposing your moon, which is sort of the center of your psychological self and also sense of personal safety, but also how you instinctively react to things. And let me point one thing out, which is that your moon is also in the term of Jupiter, and terms are a further subdivision of the sign, which say a little bit about kind of like who is the boss of a planet, so to speak. So your moon, your internal emotional self, reports back to Venus. And so does your Jupiter also report back to Venus. And so does your
Mm.
Mars also report back to Venus. So, like, these are huge, huge themes in your life for you, most likely. And in the fifth house is the house of pleasure, of creativity, of play, of art, of sexuality, of all these things that are procreative, generative, and creative.
Yeah, how does that resonate with you, Yatharth?
Has felt like everything in my life right now is connected back to that yoke of figuring out what love looks like, from wanting to fall in love and be awake for it in the winter, to dating myself, to being a hot girl, to having all of these friend dates which are exactly like a date, but I'm not interested in fucking them. And exploring all of these strangest of configurations to really shake something internal out. And it's been smoothing and unraveling, and so much felt connected to that.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And one of the things, especially with this opposition, is, we touched on the opposition between your ascendant and your Mars here. But when you have an opposition, it's like these two poles of energy cannot be resolved. Like, they're both equally strong. Sometimes one planet is stronger than the other, but in this scenario between the moon and Venus, how it will often manifest inside the self is, it's interesting that you touch on friendship, and also, how you want to love, because Pisces moon is this planet and sign combination that's very dreamy. It's very sublimative. It is very it doesn't want to put limits or definitions or boundaries on things, and it often does everything it can to remove those boundaries in order to have a more subjectively real experience of life or of reality. And it's interesting because, it's likely that within your emotional self, you embody some of these ways of being, but in terms of the Venusian Virgo piece, of Venus in Virgo can be very picky and can be very specific about the things it wants. It is demanding, it has requirements, and it has aesthetics. And a lot of the time, the reason Virgo is related to the Virgin in certain instances is due to kind of this perception of the purity and particularity of this sign. And when Venus is there, it doesn't surprise me at all to hear that you've kind of been going through a bunch of this stuff. It seems like maybe you're in a point of life where, either side of these poles, or even your Jupiter or your Mars, because you have so many aspects that are relating to this Venus, are being activated at this point.
Yeah, I'm curious, especially how this relates to the big crush that you felt. If you want to say more about that, I'm curious if this like resonates with you as to why that might have been such an impactful moment for you in your life. And how you feel about it might help me choose which of the other really prominent aspects of your chart to go to next.
Well, it really feels like that incredibly strong and direct opposition of the Mars, I believe it was, with the opposite sign. When you spoke, even in the beginning of like how much opposition there was, that felt right. Yeah, there's been a ton of tension in sort of my psychology that's always been there. A ton of energy and conflict that I've always lived off of and feeded off of. It's what drew me to Tantra or Vajra, that sort of contradiction and ambiguity and reclaiming. And so for me to see see that girl, I eventually realized uh, that I didn't necessarily so much want to be with her as much as I just wanted to be her. Every time I saw her, I felt her judgment as sort of my own judgment looking back at me, and it unnerved me. And over the last couple of months, now I meet people, I spend time with them, and they tell me at the end, "Hey, have you met this girl named?" And they say her name, and I'm like, "Yes." How funny you should compare us. So
Mm.
for me to understand that there was a reflection of this that I saw in her. Uh, she 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 was just the mirror that happened to highlight that and made me realize how much and desperately I wanted this thing that was the exact opposite of how I thought. I was reading my own MBTI, Myers-Briggs type. There was a lot of introverted feeling and extroverted sensing in her, which is the exact opposite
Mm.
of what I have. And for me to want that and actually come to embody it has been so tension relieving at last.
That is, it's so fascinating that that's like the way that it resonates with you, because it's so true what we've said so far about this opposition between Taurus and Scorpio and the placements that you have in those signs, that can be a tension that if you end up working with it because of activating circumstances in your life, that can result in a really integrative experience where these two parts of yourself, one being maybe in Jungian language the light part of yourself that is always in your awareness and feels natural to see yourself connected to, and this shadow side of yourself that is still so true and so represented in this other area of who you are, and bringing those shadow aspects into the awareness so that you can feel a greater sense of wholeness. And oppositional aspects really have that sort of a theme to them, but at the same time there's this whole other like interaction and relationship between placements that's going on in your chart that totally relates to these feelings from a different angle. And the one that really resonated with me as you were speaking about the way that this resonated with you is that sharing a sign with Mars is Chiron, which is an asteroid that we relate to as something connected to the core wounds that we have in our life. Sometimes it's called the wounded
Mm,
healer.
Hmm.
And so that is in that same part of the chart where you have your mystery and that those introverted aspects that you don't associate with yourself, and that deep sense of like spirituality and a need for depth. And that can bring up a lot of hurt for you, and yet it is also in a really easy relationship, a lovely trine aspect with your Mercury, which is in Leo. So I would imagine that as much as this relationship could have brought up a lot of hurt for you, it was perhaps easier for you than it might have been for other people to recognize consciously that experience of hurt and see in it what lessons there were to be learned for you, and think about it and communicate it to the people that you love in your life and explore it from that mercurial place of Leo, which is very centered around intuition and self-expression. And your Mercury is also sharing your sign with the Sun, which is also in Leo, and so that to me relates so much that you would have this activating experience where your Chiron is implicated and you're dealing with some of the wounds that are really at the core of whatever sort of lack of wholeness that you experience in your personality. And that becomes part of the forefront in your mind of how you think about that relationship. And that leads to this insight of like, oh, this is actually part of the experience that I had that I want to integrate into my own identity, because the sun is very much about growing more and more into who you are, and learning how to create a self concept that is in alignment for you and for your life. So all of that resonates a lot with this experience that you've had of this like biggest lifetime crush. And then just one more thing I'll add before I ask for your reflections on this is that your sun is also conjunct your north node, so it's in the exact same degree. And the north node is one of the furthest points of the moon's ecliptic, and it's related to the experience that we come into life with in like a past lives kind of mentality, and the journey that is karmically available for us to embrace in this life. So to have your sun and your north node overlapping, they're in the same place in the sky, I would imagine that you see yourself very much in terms of this journey of growth throughout your life, and are very oriented around the way that you want to be, almost as if like your identity is about this identity that you're building, rather than something that's like stuck in the present or the past. And so I wonder if all of those experiences resonate even more with you, this idea of woundedness coming to the forefront of your mind and challenging you to grow in terms of your own identity and further your own journey as the person that you are, having had this like, you know, really impactful romantic experience.
I think in life, we have these puzzle pieces sometimes of these things and thoughts we have, some truths about ourselves we know that are just not connected to everything, and we never make anything of them until the day someone contextualizes it. And for me, one of the puzzle pieces I always remarked on always when I was 12, when I was 14 and had my first best friend was like, I always knew like I had this really self-growth oriented personality. It
Mm-hmm.
was always about growth, 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 and I almost felt like conscious about it. Is there something, almost wrong or obsessive about that? Never thought much about it until now again. And similarly with woundedness, there's something that has felt so powerful for me over the last couple months about having that be such a comfortable part of my identity, like moving from the woundedness and recognizing as such a source of power, both in radicalizing me to kindness and just like the this sort of depth and fire I can bring from that, and to feel myself drawn into those sort of core themes I'd always noticed but never, made much of, and have them make sense is really weird. Um,
Yeah. Sorry, that was the moment for me. That's the kind of stuff I like. Um, Maybe can I jump into a little bit of this larger pattern of this grand cross that we're seeing here?
Yes, please do. I
Yes.
am so fascinated by this, like such a powerful combination of oppositions.
Yeah. So you've got ordinary oppositions, just generally speaking, is an aspect to 180 degrees. But then if you have another set of oppositions across perfectly orthogonal or perpendicular 90 degrees from that first cross, you get another opposition, and this forms what is called a grand cross configuration. So that's when you
Ooh.
have one, two, three, four, and yours, and they're all separated by roughly 90 degrees. And we use an orb, or allowed sort of distance of degrees, of roughly 5 to 10, especially in a grand cross configuration. It's a little bit bigger. And essentially, you can imagine it as these four forces. So over here, you could describe this is the self that you present to the world. This is the grounded, Tarian, luxurious part of you that is very also stable, a little bit added to by your Saturn near your ascendant can give you a very grounded sort of sense feeling to other people, opposing a Mars, which is a sense of initiative, of action, of sexual expression, of power that is much more secretive, much more deep digging, uncovering secrets, and really trying to get to the root and true nature of things. So you have that one opposition there, which are also in turn squaring, so by 90 degrees over here, your strong Leo stellium, which is all about your personality, yourself, your self expression, who you are as an identity and as a person, which is opposed by all this up here, where you have Uranus and Neptune very high in the sky. Uranus is opposing your node, and Neptune is opposing your Mercury, and Aquarius is a much more distant, humanitarian sign. You even mentioned something about not feeling like you should express yourself or not feeling like you should be the person that you are, which is really fascinating to me because that is really how Aquarius acts in opposition to Leo. It's sort of like, why are you worrying so much about yourself when we should be working on
Mm,
all these great projects, or we should be solving all these problems, or we should be doing this or that or the other thing? So when you have four of these placements locked into a grand cross, it's sort of like this huge, really, it is a prism of energy where force and feeling and power and energy bounces between all four of these themes. And so it doesn't surprise me at all to hear you talk about this sense of tension, of oppositions, because that's where it is right here. It's shown through these major axes. And the interesting piece of it too is that you have a couple vents here. And when I say vent, I mean, if you consider this to kind of be a visualization of your, I guess I'd say, interior or energetic interiority, like the, if you consider yourself a system of energy, this is very rigid and tough, and you have like boom 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 boom, like that's always happening. That's why it's red. It's considered harsh or dynamic. But you have these other aspects that tie in, like your Pluto here, which is connected very closely to your sun, and your moon and your Venus, which are trining some of these other aspects and a little bit outside of this configuration that can offer some relief. So just speaking very generally, potential advice you could give somebody who has a chart like this is you should
I'm
be.
sorry. I
Go
wanna
ahead.
pause. I'm really
Yes.
curious to hear what you say of this. I'm really curious. And even before that, I want to comment on firstly, I love how Grand Cross sounds.
Yeah.
It really speaks to like the vanity of mine that I've been cultivating, which is part of, one of my favorite things is renovating these values like ruthlessness or selfishness or
Hmm.
vanity all have been such important concepts to play and work with because positive values and negative values they never felt right on their own. There was something off. It's only in the contradictions that something alive emerged. So I love talking about the Grand Cross that way. And the other thing that came to my mind is I almost wish I'd done this, which is like asked people to sort of describe me and sort of come show it to you afterward. But in some ways, that did happen. The people it was essential with yesterday, like that is what they said, which is, that grounded sort of presence. People always called me earthing and grounding, and that actually really surprised me because I didn't internally feel grounded. I was like the
Hmm.
last person who was internally grounded, and people kept saying you're a very grounding presence. It always confused me. Um, but that was how it was perceived, and then there was that sort of more secret fire or raging sensuality that I have been learning to bring out, but still is quite secret in some ways and comes out in more of the mystery and darkness. It's fascinating to do this on the day we're doing where I have those echoes so clearly.
Yeah,
And I'm
absolutely.
very curious to hear about these vents and tension relieving aspects because we've talked a lot about the tensions.
Yeah, yeah. So just to remark on what you said, to point out some astrological precepts, is that your first house, especially around your ascendant, is I like to describe it as if somebody saw you at a party across the room, like they would see
Mm,
partially the sign of your ascendant and other things that are close to it, because it's kind of like this is the part of you that is projected forward, almost in an unconscious way. We often don't relate to our ascendant until we think about the way we actually act or the things that we actually do and how we navigate life. Because all the other things you describe of your interiority and how you don't feel stable are, yeah, I mean, totally. This is reflected by the overall pattern and, this Mars here, which does a lot of work. And then on the flip side, away from the first house, you also have the seventh house, which is the other person. It is the encounter with the like big O other. And this often reflects in terms of like deep commitments, but also just how you relate to other people in general. So with Scorpio there and Mars there, it can be that there's a heavy amount of intensity and a desire to know things about other people, a desire to, reach inside of the other in some way. Um, so I love hearing your reflections on all of that. In terms of the vents, when I'm looking at this, I see that there's this grand cross here, which I described as much more rigid, but then the points or the planets that are part of this configuration also make aspects to other planets. So one of the things that's very nice here is you have your moon in 5 degrees of Pisces, but then you have Mars at 10 degrees, which is part of this configuration, and then you have Jupiter, which is also part of the configuration, but it's in sextile to your Jupiter or in sextile to your moon as well. So, what this suggests is that a vent from this configuration can be found in the moon. So, trines are kind of like a natural, flowing, harmonizing energy that's so smooth as almost to be unnoticed or taken for granted. And then sextiles are very similar, but they take a little bit of conscious effort and work and personal application, but it's still kind of like a skill you're naturally predisposed to. So when we're thinking about this, what this means in terms of tension relief is that Moon is all about your inner feelings and your inner world and your sort of personal, subjective sense of safety, and that's found under Venus in terms of these Venusian topics, but also with the 11th house. So, time with friends, with community, with social clubs and groups are likely to be a way in which you can relieve some of this opposition when it's occurring. And in terms of like this more like stable, solid versus secretive and hidden and perhaps sometimes like conspiring or researching and digging energy, you'll probably find this tension melts a little bit when you are spending time among friends or especially doing things that are Venusian in that manner of like, enjoying a good party or good food or arts or what have you. Virgo tends to be a little bit more sensual overall. So that's probably a place you'd want to go. But also with Pisces, it can just be like, to say sound dumb is like literally just vibing, like that's something that actually might work for you. Whereas, maybe we use it for a joke for other people. What do you think, maybe? Where are you seeing
That is
them?
the only
Oh.
thing that has worked.
Oh, well, that's perfect.
I'm definitely interested in ways that it seems to you, Yatharth, that these vents either feel accessible to you as tension relieving aspects of your life, and maybe even especially ways that these have always been your go-to ways of grounding yourself and relieving tension and maybe like techniques that have given other people the impression that you have such a grounding presence, even if you're going to these just vibing places to resolve what is a very rich emotional life.
I mean, to me, my life has felt really, full of that sort of tension for sure. Like I'm someone who taught my way into feeling. I overthought and thought and thought. straight into making, that sort of feeling aspect what people now associate me with, which I find hilarious. Uh, but in terms of actually finding peace, it wasn't super in the thinking or even in the super intense feeling. I spent my gap year last year in 2020 across all of these different sort of spiritual traditions, Buddhism and Tantra and Taoism and psychedelic shamanism, and I had a ton of peak experiences for sure, like feeling complete with life or this and that. But I always felt alienated from them, and they never seemed to give me what I want. And frankly, the only time I felt peace has been this year when I've literally just been like, give all of that up and just be a hot girl or just like listen to what they say, right? Like and just vibe and be pretty and like enjoy things. The Taoists will like tell you to not have thoughts and just be. Hot girls actually don't have thoughts and just are, you know.
Uh,
And that has been the only thing that has brought me this level of peace.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense when I'm looking at your chart, and it also resonates to me with your trine between your like Leo stellium, including your Sun, Mercury, and the North Node with Pluto, which is
Hmm.
like speaks to me that like this is something that will unfold for you without necessarily having to, work at it and like deal directly with this like combination of tensions all the time, but it's not something that I would anticipate would unfold for you overnight or over a week or over a year. It's like throughout your life, I imagine these events becoming more and more accessible, and this idea of just vibing becoming more and more of a comfortable way of embodying that rich internal emotional life rather than like resisting or struggling against it. And then that brings to mind also this sextile between your Pluto and your Neptune, which is right almost on your midhaven, which I see as sort of an invitation to cultivate over the whole rest of your life this comfort with being the hot girl in public. Like let that be your front facing self, let that be the way that you bring yourself into collaborations with others, because your Neptune, which is also the ruler of your of Pisces, which is where your moon is right on the midhaven, which is associated very closely with our public life. But they're on opposite sides of the cusp between Capricorn and Aquarius. So I imagine that you might feel this urge to like work in public and be part of collaborations and have that be not just a public part of your life, but a place where you invest a lot of your time and energy and apply yourself and
Mm.
put in, as much effort as you can muster. And that could seem paradoxical to being this hot girl that we're associating with the vents that you have accessible to you for handling the tension that comes up in these oppositional aspects. But with your Neptune in Aquarius right near that midhaven in Capricorn, it does, especially with the sextile with Pluto, which is about like consciously cultivating long-term transformation throughout your life. It seems like there is a marriage that you could find between this dreamy alien hot girl vibing kind of personality, and like make that actually something that can support real collaboration in public with other people that inspire you, that you care about. I see that as something that could be like a big energy that could be like a guiding light moving forward for you. I wonder how you feel about that.
I'm really excited. Um, I feel deeply seen in that, like, that is how I want to present myself, right? That sort of hot girl front. There's something I get out of that being like the first thing people see about me now. And I understand that it's not the actual thing or core, but that's the front. And the actual spirit of collaboration, yes. Like that is what's underneath. That's what I want maybe. And that's what feels good. And that's how I've been co-lifing or inviting people to co-life with me every time I see them. And that idea of working in public, you know, my Twitter is basically my private journal that for some reason 1,000 people read every day. Um, but that's always sort of been part of this, and to be have begun like inviting people in my life, like I basically wrote my grad app with people on Twitter like helping me out just on calls the entire time. And I've started doing these Zoom calls with people coming on, and being sort of that centerpiece for collaboration feels really good. And it's not something I could have ever predicted growing up as a child as a role I'd ever play, but it's beginning to feel more and more natural that I haven't forced it like I would have before, but it's just sort of the next step in front of me.
Yeah, that is awesome. I totally share in that excitement for you. I wonder, Salad, if you have any thoughts on this chunk that we have explored just now.
Yeah, it's really interesting because these outer generational planets, often called generational planets, the Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, uh, I interpret them as acting very much like almost compelling forces or outsiders into the experiences that we have. And so we often get drawn into their currents. So Neptune in Aquarius, very close to the midheaven, is an interesting placement because it almost says, I want to create the perfect utopian community. It's very, very utopian in nature because Neptune both wants the ideal, like perfect manifestation, so perfect it's even unreachable in material reality. But then at the same time, you've got Aquarius, which is this very egalitarian, more outward thinking, more for the people as opposed to the self. And so when you have that Neptune there, it's very, very strong in terms of how it wants to engage with other people, and it's in opposition to this sense of self. So you kind of end up playing both sides, where you're working with the self, but also trying to perfect the self for other people, if that makes any sense. But also here it opposes your Mercury, so there's this interesting dynamic between this sense of self, which is like very thought oriented, very verbal, very linguistic. That's what Mercury does, versus Neptune, which is almost wordless and more feelings oriented and more intuitive and more spiritual. And thinking about that in connection to Pluto is also really interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned going through all these explorations of all these spiritual experiences, and Pluto itself is very much like I consider it to be very similar to Scorpio as a sign in its nature, and it tends to want to push you to survive and to transform and to change. So when you have it in trine to your sun and in sextile to your Neptune, it's almost like there's this very, very strong emphasis on being forged by Pluto to personify these planets. Like the sun is receiving powerful energy and strength and introspection constantly because of how close it is. And you'll see right here you've got Pluto is in trine within 36 minutes or half a degree, which is very, very close. Like if you were born literally half a day later, it would have been pretty much exact. And I find that really, really fascinating in reflection to all the other things you've been saying, because it sounds like there's a tremendous amount of energy and power within your personality that gets expressed through these poles and then gets vented out of these places. Yeah, I don't know. I like this chart a lot. I think it's very, very strong and very fascinating. Like I'm sure it's given you some difficulties and all the tensions and things that we've been talking about throughout much of this. But I've also seen Grand Cross people go on to do incredible things because they get forged by life.
Yeah, I just want to say too
Mm.
that having known and loved Yatharth and seeing him as such a super distinctive character out of like the friends who I've led into my inner circle, exploring this chart and seeing that this is the pattern that has created this person that I've admired is so exciting, because it just, everything feels like it's reflected in there. And it's awesome to hear it resonate with you and excite you, Yatharth.
Cool. Well, we are just about on the end of time. We've got 3 minutes left. So, Yatharth, do you have anything you want to ask about or comment on towards the end? We can run a little bit over if y'all have time, but we could also open it up to general Q&A or just end it here, whatever we're feeling like.
I definitely have time, and I'm open to sticking around as needed. Um, what the strongest thing in my mind right now is that, what I think we opened with, actually, which is maybe reflecting on how fun it always is to have people who both have the skepticism but also the open-mindedness. And as I'm sitting here, like there's a part of my brain that will always be like running like da 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 da, right? Like this is how cold readers work. This is how like associations work. This is how, whatever works. And there's that skepticism, and there is that, I wouldn't even call it intrigue, but or even warmth, but just that like there's a skepticism alongside. There is like the feeling of rightness and the feeling of settling with this thing that looked quite intimidating and complicated at first, but even then was evocative, and now has like settled, and has brought clarity and allowed things to sift. Like it would be like psyoping myself to ignore that sort of subjective feeling too. And as as I hold both of these, I'm reminded of one of my favorite passages from one of my favorite books, which is "Wearing the Body of Visions" by Ngakpa Chogyam, which goes, "You may find yourself thinking, this is psychotic verbiage. You may very easily find yourself saying, what is this maniac talking about? Who agreed to publish this insanity? These are serious considerations. The ambivalence they create is not to be avoided if we have a real interest in the practice of Tantra. We cannot afford to gloss over our sense of suspicion. We need to be real about who, what, and how we are. Perhaps at this point you want to aim this book at the waste paper basket. Or perhaps you find it inspiring and don't want to put it down. These are choices that can tickle each other. You can allow this ambivalence to exist. You can watch the alternation of your attitudes and feelings and remain with the energy of that. And if anything, I don't want to let that energy go from today, which is like, it is fantastic. I have that like da 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 voice, and also this other sense I've gotten from spending time with you on the call today, and that's just delicious to just sit with.
Yeah, that just feels like such a profound and poignant and poetic like summary of the feeling that I've seen from the episode that we had with Kiwi before, and then this episode with you too. And I think it's just a really, really beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. Unless you've got anything else, maybe. I feel like this is a perfect place to end it. This has been beautiful.
Yeah, it feels like it's just like we just put a little bow on it. So I'm happy to leave it here. It feels like a really artistic moment to end on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we'll end the voice chat here, y'all. Thank you so much for coming to listen in. Thank you, Yatharth, especially for coming on and bearing your soul with us in this moment. And thank you, everybody, for coming to witness it. If you want to chat or hang out or whatever, this Discord's going to be around probably as long as we do the project. Feel free to just talk shop or ask questions or whatever. And with that, AstroPilled number 2 is in the books.